and welcome to another Devtoberfest 2024 session. This is the second week of Devtoberfest, and we are in the so-called Mad Thursday. Mad just because we are talking about machine learning, AI, and data, and this is our third session today. As you might know, previous sessions are all available for you to watch offline. So we are looking for you to participate in all of our sessions. But specifically for this one, if you are joining live, I just would like to remind you that you can join our chat live on YouTube and you can ask your questions there, which I will read to our presenters at the very end. As well, I would like to remind you that there are chances to win some prizes by participating in our Devtoberfest contest, and the grand prize this year is once again a retreat at one of SAP TechEd Roadshow stops in 2025. And with that, let me introduce just quickly myself. So my name is Vitaly Rudnitsky. I am one of developer advocates. This session was prepared for you by my teammate Nora. Unfortunately, she couldn't join us today. And for the speakers, I would like Frank and James to introduce themselves and to start this session with the content that is much more interesting than just my announcements.
Yeah, thank you, Vitali. Frank Densborn here from the App House in Palo Alto. Great to be here. I'm really excited to be here with my good colleague, Jim. I'm an enterprise architect at the App House, and we are doing Gen AI stuff, and we get real stuff done in S/4HANA with our customers because we are a customer-facing team doing innovation on our customer side. But we couldn't do it without Jim's team, who is like the engineering force behind it. So, Jim, please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Frank. So my name is James Rapp. I hope you'll call me Jim. I'm here in Denver, Colorado, and I'm part of an engineering team in the T&I board area that's called Platform Architecture and Adoption. I'm about 21 years with SAP, if you can believe it, came by way of business objects. And this year I've been mostly working full-time on CAP, building extensions on S/4HANA and SAP SuccessFactors.
Great
Yeah,
job, man.
thanks, Jim. I
So
hope
thank
you
you for
guys see my,
introduction and please take it over. Sorry.
yeah, I hope you see my slides because I lost that frame around it, Vitali.
Uh,
Not seeing
Am
it
I
yet,
sharing?
Frank.
Okay, so see, there was something not working. Thanks for letting me know. Just learning here. Okay, let's
Now
go.
it looks good.
Cool. Okay, so let's jump into the slide. Now I have the green frame as well. So these are the pictures. So I don't even know, Jim, who is longer, has been longer with SAP. I just made 20 years in January, so maybe we are about the same there for our work anniversary. And maybe you
Good
guys
company.
can let us with SAP. You guys can let us know where you're from in the chat. So let's try that out if that YouTube chat is actually working and put something in while I show you what we are going to talk about. As Vitali said, yeah, this is the third session, the second week of Mad Thursday. I really love that. And today we will talk about the Gen AI Hub on SAP BTP. I will show you the AI Launchpad, what you can do with it. We have a prompt editor there and what we can do with S/4HANA. We tested out in Postman. And then Jim is going to build that RAG application. The CAP LLM plugin is going to be used. And we'll show you where you can find samples in GitHub and how to actually enhance applications. And then I will show you even what a customer of ours is actually doing with that. And they just went live. And then take actions and next steps. We're to learn more at Devtoberfest. And remember, next week is TechEd. Devtoberfest will pause, but there will be a lot of new stuff for TechEd as well. And yeah, this is the agenda. Generative AI Hub, I hope everybody has heard about it. This is a number on the top right that is coming from the Q2 this year. So I don't know, it might be even more. So many customers are already using and leveraging SAP Business AI, which is embedded AI. It's always on cloud, but you can use it also through the Generative AI Hub on SAP BTP. I think that's the most beautiful part for us developers to do things because you have access to all the models. We have partnerships with all the big players. We have like prompt modules. I hope there is some announcement coming up next week for that. We have a chat UI that will show you, because the great thing is with this way, you not only have access to all those, large language models that you probably won't even have. We have some of the open source ones even on SAP hardware. So for those of you who really like cautious and don't want to send anything, but anything else, like take a GPT model, instead of using ChatGPT where you send it to Azure, OpenAI, you don't know what they do with it, training the data or something. We have contracts with these partners so that they cannot do anything with the data, and you will see how easily you can even switch. So consider that for any kind of like data confidentiality. We will also talk a little bit about anonymization, but also like how you can do like simple things that are available on SAP BTP, like data masking, making sure that your private data is not going into the wrong hands. And with this, let's jump into the system. And as I said, so we have like this chat window here. So this is the AI Launchpad, and everybody should really know about this. It's on BTP, it's part of the AI Hub. And with this chat window, you think like, okay, so why do I have to have my chat GPT or something? But here, as I said, we partner with all those players. So you have like not only the possibility to play with things like the temperature, you also can select any of those models that we partner with. So this is just like GPT V5. We can even go here to 4.0. So for example, if you don't have a subscription to that, we do have Anthropic. We have all kind of like models that you can think about. And we even have like models that are open source that we are running on SAP hardware, as I said. So I'm happy with the GPT-4. So let's try that out. And what do people do with this? They probably, what did people do with LLMs at the beginning anyway? So I saw a lot of people doing tell me a joke, but because it's Devtoberfest, uh, tell me a joke about a software engineer. Okay, let's see what
Hey,
GPT-4o
I'm going to
comes up.
resemble that remark, I can tell.
Why do software engineers prefer dark mode? Because light attracts bugs. There you go, Jim. We will see that once we switch screens here.
Sure
And
will.
we can try the same, can see basically. So so let's go to Claude and see if Claude is funnier than GPT-4o. And you see here which model you're using. Why do programmers always mix up Christmas and Halloween? Because October 31st is not equal to December 25.
I think GPT was funnier. No
Expected
offense, Claude.
25. I think so too. Last time I got a good one. And that one was, what do you call a quick developer, Jim?
I don't know, Frank, what do you call him?
A prompt engineer.
Ooh.
But
Oh,
by the way,
fancy
I
name.
like this joke about, this oct 31
Octal
equal
system.
decimal 3025, right? Because it's like, how do you call it in English? This eight-based
Ah,
numeric
yes.
system, which is
Yeah,
described
octal
as
number
oct.
system.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. So that is what people did. So then you can also do any kind of stuff because I'm German, as you probably can hear with my accent. This is language model. So people used it to translate stuff. So then you can translate things, and when you translate stuff, you can also translate to programming language. It's just a language, right? And it's even easier because it's much more structured than natural language, right? So then you probably know there are like microservices that you can call, especially for the weather. So I'm sitting here in Palo Alto. We have a heat wave. It was like more than 100 degrees Fahrenheit here, like more than like about 38 degrees Celsius yesterday. Today is going to be another hot day. So you can also like do things. Now I just have that no longer in my clipboard. So let me just copy this, what I've already prepared. So you can do things like this. I want you to act as a weatherman, ask me for the city and give me the HTML string for a weather API call. So now I'm not specifying yet which one. Example with zip code 94070. I'm in San Carlos, that's my zip code. I need you to convert the city to zip code. If there are multiple cities with the same name, ask which one. And this is the example. So let's put maybe like, to make it clear, sample call for a web service here. And let's see what happens. This is now Claude. So this is a system prompt. So I tell the system what to do. To get started, could you please tell me which city you'd like to better information for? Let's put in Palo Alto. And let's see if it knows Palo Alto. And this is not a user prompt. And again, the beauty here is you can play with this. You can use different models. You can play with all the different things. So this is 94301, the Palo Alto zip code. And then I got more than what I thought, but it also tells me to replace the API key. And now it's about using this. And we can also try this with another model. Again, let's go cheap because it's not always like the biggest model is the best. So we go to 3.5 and let's do the same thing. And it's kind of like an efficiency game here. So you want to figure out what gives you the best results and it's not breaking the bank. And let's now go to Vitaly. Where are you located?
I am in Wrocław in Poland.
Oh my God. How do you spell
All right,
it?
you
Like
got to spell
this?
it. You got to spell it, Frank. You asked the question.
Yeah, I know. Is this correct?
Unfortunately, I don't see it on your screen. It's a little bit like
Let's
close
see
for
if
me.
what it comes back.
Ah,
I'm sorry, I don't have any information about what's left.
it should
You try
be
Okay,
Denver Boulder.
W. Oh, Boulder.
okay, Boulder, right? Boulder, Colorado. Let's see if it knows your zip code, Jam.
It did
Oh,
better.
see, there are more boulders. It asked me for the state. Sure. So the zip code. Oh, now it just messed it up. Okay, so this is live. So use. So I wasn't clear enough in the and maybe there was a lot of noise here. Use the zip code. So see, you can practice stuff here and then you learn. So the thing is, now it gives me it correctly, 80301. Is that correct, Jim?
Sounds right.
So this is why we want to use this. We want to use this to get an idea, to see what it can do. And then now it creates us like a URL that we can call. So last year, Jim and I went to ASAC Tech Connect after Taggart. That was last year in New Orleans, in Louisiana. And we tried something even bolder than this. So we tried an OData get query because, again, we query a system and then with natural language, and it will create for us the string. So how did you do this to put the string together? Because at the end, you need to make sure that you only get that string, and also you need to take that string and call the system. So what did you do for that, Jim?
Yeah. So in regards to the tooling that you showed us and talked about, this time last year, we didn't have any of it, right? The topic was fairly new, and we were trying to show, let's say, the art of the possible, right? So we created this hands-on. In fact, it's still sitting in GitHub, Frank, if we want to share the link a little bit later. But the idea is we built a CAP service that mashed up these S/4HANA APIs. And then we used an SAP Build app to kind of test drive GPT-4 with a little business context, right? And as Frank mentioned, at that time, we were using the Gen AI just to create an OData GET request, right? So think it's a URL basically. Then, based on that URL, we got a result set from HANA and then piped the result set into a follow-up prompt, right? Along with some query about the contents, right? So I think, Frank, we were doing things like what anomalies are found in the distribution of these materials, right? And, it was kind of trivial. It wasn't integrated at all, but I remember having a lot of fun, and I think the attendees did as well.
Yeah, it was so much fun. And you're right, um, there was no Gen AI Hub back then. At TechEd it was announced, but it wasn't there yet. And from here to practice, because you need it's like trial and error. Prompt engineering, you get your prompt right. The good thing is large language models can even help you, making your prompt better because they also know what they best understand, and you can prompt them in a way to do that. But let me go to the prompt editor. So remember, you have the chat, we have the prompt editor, and in the prompt editor, there we have also things that you can store your prompts with a version. So maybe, I just copied this from our SAP Build Apps kind of thing. And you can then also say like things like, okay, so the system prompt is this. That's like what the user doesn't see. This is like in the background what we sent to the LLM. And the user basically in that little prompt here for the OData query builder just types in the question. And to get to your right prompt, you can use this tool here and can say, things like, give me the availability of all material FG200 and plant 1000. We give examples, we explain to only answer with OData queries, and let's see how that goes. We have now here GPT-3.5, and it gives me something back that is like you concatenate it with the rest of the URL, and then we do this call. So that's kind of like the thing that we did last year. And from here, you can do like things like anomalies as a next step once you have that data. So we analyzed that data and was all cool, like people really loved it. But now we even went one step further because we were like, okay, so we can do get. How about creating the body for a post message and create the JSON with the large language model? And we did that as well. And let me pick one of these, maybe this one. And you can always save this. You have a version. So why is this even good? Because why do you need this? Again, you need it because you can test this with all the different models. So you can get access to all the models. Also, maybe in your company, you're not even allowed from the company to use like ChatGPT or you don't have an account with Anthropic, you cannot use Claude. So here you can just see how these models perform, because that is really important to make this whole thing not breaking, that it's really reliable and it's of course non-deterministic, but to really get the right model, to get the right parameters and all of that. So then now we say that we went to another example to create this response for what we call the timesheet API. So we found another API in S4 from the workforce timesheet, and in S4 it looks like this. So for example, today is the 3rd of October. I can book time here, just like, if you're in, you can click here like the project and you book time, right? So now the thing is, can I do this also with natural language? So the idea was a consultant doesn't need to go in here and they can just like, I'm leaving the client on a Friday night, just even like with voice to text, you could just say, book 1 hour for this project, and then it's for today, and it's going in. And the way we approach that is, if you look at this, what I explain it again, I give an example, and I also tell it, this is the part of the grounding that we're doing here, also today's date. So let's do 1 hour on the Disney project, and it learns about my projects and stuff and see what happens. So let's run this. So I changed a little bit, and then we can always save it. But before we save this, let me just copy this, because you wonder, what do you do now with this JSON here? You jump on and go to Postman. And then, let's do this call. Let's just remove this. I have my S4 system here, and let's put this in what was generated here. So this is exactly from here, and it's just saving. The saving takes the longest because it gives a new version for this. You can always go back, because sometimes you think you make it better, but you actually didn't. So that's like so wonderful to have all these versions once you work with this a lot. And now click on send here. And so there's bad request. So I don't know what happened here. Let me see. Let me see if
Frank,
I
you're not going to
post it.
create some entries in my nice clean timesheet, are you?
No, I have a different user and I can
I'm
remove it.
grateful.
Um, and you see, maybe my token kind of like went away. So maybe I hand it to you. And what I will do in the timesheet though, I thought I had a different user. I can also delete it. So very clean, just for you,
Sure. No
Jim.
problem. I appreciate that. So let me go ahead and take over the screen share and we'll get the ball rolling on this demo. All right. Somebody just give me a thumbs up there, Frank, if you can see GitHub when that comes up.
Yes,
Um,
I can.
Great. So, as Frank was alluding to, we've come a long way since last year. Creating Get URLs is pretty trivial. And the bonus is there's no real possibility of side effects. As soon as we start asking an LLM to create post bodies, we're really going to create new entries in our ERP system, right? So it's critical that those values are accurate. We couldn't have done that in a build app. Let's just put it that way. Right. So if we flash forward to Q1 of this year, we've now got both the Gen AI Hub, we've got the HANA Cloud Vector Engine generally available, and we start getting the possibility to help customers do these really powerful things inside their business applications with generative AI. So what I'll show you momentarily is this, let's say, simplified timesheet tracking app sample that was developed by our Palo Alto team, and it leverages some tooling, right? So in addition to the prompt editor, oh, that's interesting. I already have a problem myself. We'll just keep it here, see if I can zoom that in a little bit. Okay, great. What we have here at the bottom is this CAP LLM plugin, which is an additional piece of tooling that helps us create these RAG-based applications. Frank's going to tell you a little bit more about the actual customer scenario after this demo. But the key point I'm trying to make is that we've got a lot of this new and improved tooling, right? And it supports really highly integrated development of generative AI applications, right? So why don't I get my IDE and S4HANA sessions ready and we'll just start taking a look, right? So we're going to start with this sample. And we'll share the link to this GitHub repo. And if you clone this sample, it's going to get you a UI5 freestyle application, a HANA Cloud database that's equipped for RAG with the CAP LLM plugin. What that means in practice is that you can generate vector embeddings, perform similarity searches, all with a series of nice helper functions and some auto wiring that I'll drill into here in a moment. You also get these 3 remote services in the timesheet service that are based on standard S/4HANA APIs. And we also have an action to get some user information, right? And this is a custom CDS development on the S4 side. Fortunately, we had some basis type colleagues to help us out with that. So just to get started, I have added a couple of request.http calls to show us how these services work, right? So I've also configured this application for use with the profile hybrid, which means that if my token hasn't expired, we're going to resolve some cloud service bindings. We're going to connect to the XSUAA, the destination service, and a HDI container that I have there so that we can run all of this locally from our IDE. In this case, I'm using VS Code. Right, so if I start with a post to this get user endpoint, this is what we'll see here in a few moments when it runs in the web UI. And you can see that we get some information back. Right? Specifically, what we're looking here are for things like the person work agreement, the person external ID, which allow us to actually create these timesheet entries on behalf of the user. All right, so similarly, we want to populate some of those objects that Frank showed us, right? That's things like um, what time records are already available in the system, right? Looks like I've got none for this user at the moment. That's okay. We just deleted and made sure it's really clean. Probably if I move this back to June or something, at the risk of going off script, indeed, we'll find some bookings that this user made back in June or July. Similarly, we can fetch all of the project elements that this user is staffed to, right? And this is going to be necessary in the UI as well. This comes back, it shows us not only the unique identifier of these projects, but a lot of the other properties, the description, the plan start and end date, so on and so forth, right? And by providing this richness of information, we give our UI5 app some context and grounding, right? We make sure that they can't select a project that they're not staffed to or that isn't valid for a time frame, and it gives some guardrails for our work with the LLM. Right. So Frank already showed you the timesheet, but just so that we can bask in my dark mode for a minute, indeed, it does keep the bugs away. You'll see that I have this opened on behalf of this fictional person, Brett Neal. And as Frank showed, I can like click around and add these different entries, right? But I can only target one day at a time. And if I make a mistake, I have to clean this up manually, and if I miss this tiny X, it gets even worse in order to have like the accurate timesheet. And I think Frank has some numbers for us at the end about, in practice, what this costs a company when there are, let's say, hundreds or thousands of person days that are unaccounted for, right? So we'll get to this more in a little bit. But initially, it seems like a really good candidate for a simple conversational interface. So moving back into the IDE, the interaction with the LLM all happens in this chat service. I made a change to the date. I'm not going to save it. All right. So if I pull this up, and I'm trying to make this big enough for you to see. So let me see if I can resize the windows just a little bit without throwing myself off. Okay. So you're going to see a version of this system prompt that Frank showed you a little while ago, right? I'm optimistic that sometime soon we can read these saved and version prompts directly from the Gen AI Hub via API. But for now, we still embed the system prompt in this like main exported function. And what you can note is that it's kind of studded liberally with these tag templates, right? These template literals, which give or inject an element of dynamism right into this. So when we call this, we can read things like the user's company code, their ID, the current timestamp and activity type, and make sure that ChatGPT or whichever model we're using is equipped with that information. Right. This is how we take some of those guardrails out of the S/4HANA system, the business context and the data, and we pass that through to the LLM. Okay. And similarly, outside of this file, we have the timesheet service, which is going to give us these 4 action handlers that I mentioned before. Right. So let me just go ahead and collapse these. So here in the time service, we have the ability to fetch a time record, to create a time record, which is where most of the magic happens, and then to fetch the project elements and the user information, right? So, as I was testing this application, I found that it did a pretty good job of entering time for one day at a time. But in the spirit of adding something new for Devtoberfest, I thought it would be even better if you could ask for a range of dates to be completely or partially filled in. And on Monday, because our S/4HANA cloud system was down for maintenance over the weekend, I set out to add the feature, right? And right away, what I noticed is that the workforce timesheet API that Frank brought up briefly, and I'll deep dive into a little bit more, it has, a get and post that it supports, but there's no other verbs, right? And when we look at the schema for the timesheet entry collection, we see that the post body has to be an object, right? So it's not going to accept, for example, an array of objects, which would let us, let's say, create timesheet entries for every day in a calendar week all at once, right? But you may notice that in addition to the main workforce timesheet, there's also this icon for batch requests, right? And while like the documentation here, the Swagger documentation is not great, I can tell you that batch is a really powerful way to submit numerous CRUD requests, right? So think creates, updates, and deletes all in the same request. right? The downside of this is that it's practically impossible to do it by hand or in Postman. You really need a library to help, right? But we're lucky because here at SAP, we also have access to the SAP Cloud SDK. And I'll show you momentarily that it can be easily incorporated into your CAP applications. And here in the Business Accelerator Hub, we even see the instructions for generating a type-safe OData client, right? Details are here. It has pretty extensive documentation that you can find about how to work with batch requests and change sets. And I more or less copied this code into the handlers that we'll look at momentarily, right? So what I'm going to do next is try to switch over to a feature branch that I created that has some of these changes, and we'll spend the rest of the demo time here. So I'll switch over to this add branch, this add batch branch. That's a tongue twister, right? And what I'm going to show you here are a few additions, right? So the first thing you'll notice is that under SRV external, row this again, I have the API specification in EDMX, and I also have this options per service JSON, right? And what this allows me to do is, for example, specify the base path to the API and then some package and directory information, right? So by creating this, when I generate that typed client with the command you looked at a minute ago, this is going to create a whole series of files that I can use as an OData version 2 client, right? And I did run this almost exactly the same way that it lists in the Business Accelerator Hub. The only difference is I added a flag that's called transpile set to true. And this is what creates the JavaScript and the JavaScript map files that I need to work with my JS application. I didn't write or pick up a TypeScript-based application. So I then also added the necessary imports to that timesheet service. See if I can get back to that. So you'll see this information here at the top is very similar to the information on the Business Accelerator Hub, right? That shows you here how to import the API from your generated client, how to destructure the API out of the service, and then indeed how to build an OData call and send it through a destination, right? So great little snippet to help you get started with your own Cloud SDK integration. The only other thing worth mentioning is I did bring in some deserializers, right? The goal of this is that ChatGPT is giving us JSON text, right? Which we'll see here in a couple of minutes in the debugger. I need to turn that from a JSON string into a type-safe entity representation of this timesheet entity. To do that, Cloud SDK gives me some helper functions, right? You're going to see in a minute that like most of the challenges I ran into have to do with this deserialization, specifically handling dates and trying to do localization of time zones, right? And I'm going to give you a little spoiler on that before we move any farther. So here in the API reference, maybe you already know this, maybe you don't, we can see the data type, right, of each of the values that are required in the payload. And if we look at this timesheet date, we're going to see that it is a JSON, OData, EDM, date time, whatever you want to call it, but a structured data type and not just a date time string, right? So keep this in the back of your mind for when we debug the application here momentarily. But just wrapping up what was changed here in this branch, I also made some update to the CAP LLM plugin settings, right? To leverage this concept, right? See if I can get down to it somewhere around line 180. Get chat completion with config, right? So what this allows us to do is define one or more models in our cdsrc.json, and you can see them here, right? So I have wired the application to be able to use GPT-4, but Frank and I will show you in a minute, we had some issues generating the dates, some crazy hallucinations, and I really wanted to test GPT-4o, right? And so by adding these properties into my CDS RC, I'm then able to, whoops, wrong file. I'm then able to switch between models just by a quick change to my CDS ENV requires, right? More about that here in a moment. All right. So finally, I made some updates to the assistance instructions, right? And we'll deep dive on this in a couple of moments, right? But primarily, this was to accommodate an array of objects if the user asks for a date range, and similarly to provide a lot more details around the date time, specifically explaining to the system how the response has to be formatted, right? Okay, the last thing I did before we actually run this and get to the demo is I made some changes to the create time record. Right, so let's get down to this. It still has my breakpoints, it looks like. And you're going to see both the deserializer as well as some handling of these batch requests. Right, so the idea is I take each value in the array, I pass it through the entity builder to create a timesheet entry, and then I deserialize that directly into this create request builder to create one or more time record entries. Right? And I'll be publishing this branch shortly after the call so you can see it in action. So I think I have all my breakpoints in place. Let me just double check my lines. Okay, 55, and that looks good. Let's take a quick look back at the chat service as well on line 183. Great, so I have all of my breakpoints in here. I just added a very small addition to my launch.json so that we can run CDS Watch Hybrid from VS Code's built-in debugger. If you're using Business Application Studio, you'll find a similar mechanism already in place, right? So, drum roll while you're on mute there, Frank. Let's go ahead and see if I can start the debugger. Okay. And let's go ahead and run it. Right, so this is going to switch me into my debug view. Text is a little bit bigger here. I hope you can all see it. And, let's go ahead through like a basic demo, right? To first show you what happens when we try to book 8 hours through the application. Right, so I'm going to go over here to my local app. This is immediately going to run a couple of queries against the S/4HANA system. So you can see that I have a previous record here that I'm going to go ahead and delete. We'll check quickly on the debugger just to make sure everything's running as expected. Okay, and then it looks like I have to do a refresh because what I need here from our project are the list of project elements that I'm assigned to. And as you can see, Frank, I'm already getting an issue with that. Let's see if creating a new time record resolves that.
Yeah, I found my issue that I had, which was just the token was expired, even though I did it before we started, but I had to get actually a new
Indeed.
CSRF token, and maybe it was just that time at 8 o'clock my time here that it required a new token. Because before to communicate with S4HANA, it's not just the authentication that you guys need. You also need to do a get, like a very first get to just fetch the token that you then would use for the post call. So that was my problem.
Indeed. And I just discovered my problem. It's that I accidentally brought a file over from the main branch that was different, and I'm going to try to respool this and expect that everything is going to work. Fingers crossed. All right. We'll give that a moment just to start back up the debugger. Let's see if a refresh here gives us some improvement in the OData call. And you can see
There we
already that
go.
it did. Brings up our booking for the time data. Great. Okay, here we go. So let's go ahead and add a new record. And at this point, we're going to try to book just 1 day's worth. So I'm going to tell the LLM, right, book 8 hours on the 23rd of September against, and I'm going to pick one of these projects, right? When I pick that, it binds the UI to some of the metadata behind that it can then send into the LLM prompt. So let's give this a try. I'm going to run this. We'll see if I get a breakpoint. I do. Fantastic. And so the first breakpoint that I put in is to show us what happens when we get a call back from the LLM. All right, let me resize some of these windows. So what you're going to see is that it pulls that configuration out of my CDS env, right? And I'm using GPT-4o in this case. And like similarly, you can see the actual LLM response as well as the prompt and the messages in it, right? So if we look at this, we can see the role of system defining, right? This is what came from that big hairy prompt that you saw in the chat service. This is initially the assistant giving the welcome message to our friend Brett Neal. And then finally, the user response about booking 8 hours on the 23rd of September. Similarly, LLM has sent back some information, right, that you can see here a little bit down the chain, right? And specifically in the message object, again, try to get me a little more real estate here to deal with. Great. We can see the response, right? And as I mentioned, this is a JSON string. So GPT's given it back to us with carriage returns and everything else. We'll be able to see that in a structured sense after I now pass this through to the CAP handler. So let's go ahead and continue on to the next step, right? And so immediately you now see that we're in the timesheet service, that I have a conversation ID. This is managed by that CAP LLM plugin. I have a raw payload, and I have a parsed payload as well, right? That shows me that person work agreement, this fancy date that was created by the LLM, and the details of my timesheet field, right? Now, as a last step, let's take a look at this as it passes through the SAP Cloud SDK. And what you're going to see, if I can remember what my variable name is that I have a response as well from the Cloud SDK, right? And if we look at that, you're going to notice, I hope, right away that this is a typed response, right? So at the beginning of our JSON object, we have this timesheet entry. Tells us that this is no longer just JSON, but this is an actual entity representation out of the Cloud SDK. Nowhere can we see that better than by looking at the timesheet date, right? So now it's not a JSON OData, it's not a string, it's actually a moment, right? That's been enriched with locale, with the actual time, and you can see where the code is running. Sunday, September 22nd, right? But in Mountain Daylight Time, right? So this is the key, right? Remember, this is non-deterministic. So I'm going to let this go through, right, in POC code. So Frank and I probably could have spent an extra week fine-tuning that prompt, but we thought better to show you, both sides of the equation, right? So here we are back in the UI. You see my entry to this IF2111, and it says that there's a draft that's been saved. So now, if I go back to the timesheet and I take a look at, see, there you go, wrong click. I'll do a quick refresh, and then let's move back and see if the entry shows up on the 23rd or on the 22nd. Great. So it made it to the 23rd. You can see that we have a booking here, right, of 8 hours against Ingo's demo project, which is the description for that IF 2.1.1. All right, fantastic. So now, right, I think it's time to run a more complicated prompt, right? One where we ask for a range of dates to be entered, and let's intentionally leave some of that range out, right? And I struggled with this quite a lot for about a day due to the date format that I showed you, right? That schema indicated that we need to pass an OData JSON date, but the Cloud SDK, wouldn't allow us to pass that string, right? We need to make sure it's formatted according to the schema. And as such, I needed to teach the AI a bit about what these dates and these EDM date times actually looked like, right? So what did I do in the vein of AI? I asked another AI to help me out with this, right? So I asked GitHub Copilot to write me some code to create training data on initialization for the AI. And let's spend a minute looking at that in the next one. But like really briefly, you can see here at the beginning of the chat service, I am initializing some training data. Let's go up to the top where it belongs. And that training data is a big long function that's returning some representations of the date as a string and the date in its milliseconds since the epoch form, right? Okay, so I'm going to start an additional prompt. I think I'm still running in debug mode, right? Let's take a look. Yep, it looks good. I see my toolbar right here. So let's go back to the UI and let's try to create one more record. Okay. And we're going to say something this time along the lines of book 8 hours each day, right, between the 30th September and the 4th of October. And we want those dates to be inclusive, right? This time we're going to try to book that to the Disney project. So we'll go ahead and submit that. We'll go back and look at hopefully our trusty breakpoints. Now we're asking the LLM to generate a much more substantial response. So it typically takes a little bit longer. Right? Let's see if we can find the training data for the API. So let's see, somebody can show me the init training data. And you know what? I might not be able to find it. Let's see if it's in the local here. Date training data. Fantastic. So if I open this, we've now embedded in the system prompt some representations of the current date, right? And I've explained to it that you're going to see these milliseconds since the epoch. You're going to see these full date times, and they relate to one another in the following fashion, right? Similarly, there's a localized version that represents wherever the code is running, in my case, mountain time. And all that I have told the LLM is take this localization into consideration when you return a value. Right. And similarly, we have this for last month, next month, so on and so forth. Right. All right. So let's continue to the next step in our debugger. And we can see again the payload, the conversation ID, and if I wanted to, all the information about the LLM configuration. But what we really want to look at here is in this final section where we are creating a series of these records via batch, right? And so what you're going to see are a number, right? An array of 5 objects in this payload, right? All right, so right away, we know the LLM got the range right. That's 5 days in our work week. I can't tell you right now without debugging in the epoch time converter if these are right, but as a first step, we know we got the number of these values correct, right? So let's try to go through this. We're going to let our debugger resolve. And it looks like our non-determinism got us close, but as we might say here, no cigar, right? So deterministic process for our demo, we asked it to create a range, and we'll see that it got pretty close, right? It offset these days a little bit and it missed the first part of our range, right? Which is probably something that we could do or fix by tweaking that prompt using some of the techniques that Frank showed. It raises some interesting questions about what is an AI problem and what is a full stack problem. My learning from this is that it might have been better to leave the date strings to the AI and handle the type conversion in the action handler on the CAP side, right? But in any case, the feature is, let's say, demo ready for all of you. And we can see how much luck we just had with GPT-4o. I'll tell you that yesterday with GPT-4, it wasn't even getting me in the right year sometimes, right? If I left a year out. So this is a pretty significant improvement. Um, I do want to give Frank a shout out as I hand it back to him because he reminded me of the power of simply testing a different model, right? And that wraps up my demo, Frank. I'd like to hand it back to you.
Cool, thank you. And with this, I think what we can really see is the power, as you said, of the different models, but also what it means, the testing here. Again, let's break it down in two pieces, because there's a lot to digest from the coding and a lot of things that can go wrong that you need to debug and stuff, but you want to have your prompt right. So that's why we have the Gen AI Hub, and you're going to use the CAP LLM plugin. And with that, you can take care of confidentiality, anonymization. You can take care of, like, you connect to a SAP BTP's HANA Cloud because it has a vector engine. So you can do RAG with grounding. We did the grounding here in the prompt, but you can also do grounding on the vector database if it is like a different use case where you have like a lot of data, a lot of text data that you can access. So you give the model more. So here the tokens would always come in with all the examples, but Jim is right. So some of those models handle time things better than others. They're probably even improved by that because, it's a language model. It was never intended for that, but it got better with these things because, people do like all these crazy prompts and see, haha, there's like a response or hallucination or something like that coming. So what you want to do is you start with the chat UI or go directly to the prompt editor. You try to get that prompt. You use, Postman, and hopefully you fetch your token for the S4 system, and then it just both is there. You just go to the timesheet, it's there. So this works. You always, it's a learning curve. You always make the prompt better, but also you want to have like at the end an efficient prompt, meaning, you don't need to go for the highest model always per se, because they're also more expensive, even though cost is going down like so quickly now. But you want to make it like a nice thing that you can rely on one model. You do all the testing there. And this is what our customer did. But before we get there, how did we start? So we from the app house, Jim from the platform architecture and BTP adoption team, and S4HANA Cloud Product Management work together. We have like a couple of customers in what we do from the app house and explore and the design workshop where we get to these use case brief ideas, where we ideate, because we don't want to do this just for fun. We want to have a real business case to get these things done in S4 that is not part of embedded SAP Business AI, where you can build your thing with coding, as you saw on BTP, as a side-by-side extension for really, keeping your core clean. We have these cards. We did this exercise. The timesheet came up. I thought the timesheet comes up because, if you probably have like history of consulting, the drill here. My boss always comes to me. Have you completed your timesheet? End of the week, timesheet. End of the month, timesheet. End of the quarter. Oh my God, still no timesheet? You got to do this because it's not just, that it costs me time and my time is valuable, I guess also for the company because they pay me my salary. But no, there was a real use case that I only learned from one of these customers. And customers Beyond Technologies, they're a syntax company in Canada. And, they talk business, they talk days sales outstanding. What does that mean? So you get a haircut, they don't let you out of the place before you pay. You have a subscription to a gym, they're even more lucky. They're like the luckiest because they get your money before you come. Even if you don't come, maybe you don't feel like it. But how does it work in consulting? So the service is delivered last month, September. So now the tricky part is the billing requires that all the consultants have their timesheet done. So let's say it's like 2 weeks, half of October, but it's delayed. And they told us, like, they just try to emphasize that, but the consultants don't finish it. So before the project's not finished, they cannot really bill the customer. So there's a delay. And then if the timesheet wasn't done accurately because it was done so late, like people procrastinate, they didn't do it, so they didn't remember, they put in the wrong thing, the customer says, no, this is not correct. So the whole payment is further delayed. So what is the problem? The problem is if you're a company running on like cash flow, you got payrolls in between. And here in North America, it's 2 payrolls per month. So you got to pay your consultants. And they told us that every single day of sales outstanding, so that they don't have the timesheet and don't get the bills out, don't get paid, cost them because they have to finance it, over $100,000. So this is why we said like getting real stuff done, also a real business case. This is not just about having a nice assistant who can take off a little bit of work for you. No, the idea is to have these consultants getting the work done. How did we do it? I mean, you saw it probably already. We did like a little like gamification in the top left that you see how it works. So this UI is what we came up with. It is not the timesheet, it's a task tracker. So the idea is what Jim did to just write down or to say it of what exactly happened now to create it in the system as a draft. And the draft, then, of course, you review. We want to have the human in the driver's seat here before it's going to be built to the customer that they can go over it. But you have everything in it at the end of the week. So you click on this My Timesheet app link and you jump into it and you can just approve it here. So this is the beauty of that, why this is really a big business case for them. And this, of course, is an own UI, but this can and will live in Joule because Joule is coming. You will hear about that at Taggart with like a custom extension where you can add like things to Joule that, you know, Joule would ask whatever you have built here in BTP to use that for your task. So if you're working as a developer in a consulting firm, you should look for this. It's in GitHub. There's an SAP community blog post about that. You can find the way how to ideate, how to find ideas for use cases on apphouse.sap.com. And there's more to come. So from Jim's team, Madan and Akash are talking about this CAP LLM plugin. They call it the guide to mastery of this. It's Devtoberfest on October 14. So you're gonna check that out. It is in the ABAP and CAP stream. And that would be, you know, my proposal to you guys where you can kind of like go next and learn more here at the Oktoberfest. So back to you, Vitali, sorry.
Yeah, I see that it is going to happen on October 14. I like this date on the slide. Frank, would you mind just to go these 2 slides back where you were showing this days outstanding, you know, this chart?
Sure.
So now this, as you can see, this joke that Claude did, it makes absolutely sense, right? Because what it was saying is that Oct 31 is exactly the same as Dec 25, right? So from the payment perspective, it makes absolutely right. So it seems like Claude knew what you are going to present, and therefore they did this joke just spot on. There is no difference between. Sorry, it was.
What was it? Halloween is equal to Christmas, or what was it? I don't remember.
Exactly.
It was that Oct 31 is equal to Dec 25, right? So that's why your payment is delayed, because basically there is no difference between these 2 dates.
In the octal number
Merry
system,
Christmas.
at least, right?
So you know, just looking at this calendar that you are displaying, you should just mark the Oct 25 Oct 31 Dec 25, and then the joke would perfectly make sense. Thank you, guys. I believe this was one of the most high octane Devtoberfest presentations I ever participated in, and I think that as I know many folks who are watching these sessions later on, they put like, you know, 1.5 speed, 1.7 speed with your presentation. They will need to put 0.5 speed and press pause quite often, just, you know, to realize what's going on, because it was not just only tongue twisting, it was mind bending as well.
That's the goal. But just to close that, Vitaly, we'll be publishing the new branch to the GitHub repository that I put in the chat, and I'd be happy to take any inquiries going forward from customers or partners who are interested. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. So just a few questions, and before I go into chat, one question from my side, because there is this, you know, old joke that basically there is no difference between developing regular application and developing AI-backed application, because in both cases you just call APIs, and therefore, you know, if you are just calling API from something from some service, then your application developer. If this API is coming from from the model, then all of a sudden you are AI developer or AI engineer, and you should be paid like 30% more because your title is more fancy than just app developer. So from your experience, is it really like that? Is it just calling the same API as you would be calling from any other service, or is there something new, different, mind-bending
Yeah.
once you are working on this LLM-based application?
That's a really good question. I wouldn't mind getting paid 30% more, but my actual experience is that it's different from a standard API because those are typically deterministic, right? If I paste the same payload to an S/4HANA system 100 times, it's going to create the same business object as long as I got that payload correct. With
Mhm.
the AI, there are not only a lot of data science type parameters that you can tune, but as soon as you switch the model or switch one character in your prompt, you can generate a completely different answer. And at least from my point of view as a full stack developer, I don't really like non-deterministic things, right? If I'm
Mhm.
telling my code that it expects an array, I really want an array every time, or I'm catching an exception. And I think the main learning for me was that putting these two like really incredible fields together, full stack and AI, means that there's not a clear-cut explanation when to use AI and when to use full stack. You need to use your imagination, you need to iterate, and you need to be flexible in your experimentation before you try to put all the pieces together. Right? That's my
Mhm.
main takeaway.
Thank you, Jim. Frank, anything from your side to add?
Yeah, and you do the testing, you want to make sure because, SAP also has the three R's, what we want to do with, our business AI approach. So you want to make sure that whatever you get, you have all the fallbacks built in. So that is why, for example, in this case, we said it should be as a draft. The user is still in charge and looking over it. It's not a problem. What we are doing here is trying to help with something that's really, valuable for the user, but, it might not always work if the user is just not putting it right or something. You saw that earlier in those examples. But at the end, it should give you something, some benefit. It should do something that wasn't even there before. There might be always like the case where something, cannot be done. You go to the timesheet, you go to the timesheet anyways to approve it and do things. But the interesting thing that comes with this is that you have like two sides to deal with, and there's a lot of testing, not just in the debugging, also what you can get. And you learn so much if you go to the AI Launchpad, and I really would really advise everybody to just use that, just because you have all the models there to polish your prompt. You want to have it short, concise, but it needs to be, accurate enough that the machine exactly knows what it does or should do. And of course, there's always surprises. But how you talk to it, it's exactly how you would talk to an assistant. If you don't want certain things, you tell it not to do it. Sometimes we need to tell it twice. At the beginning, you say, I only want that, JSON. Don't give me any clutter around it. Or put it in like these kind of brackets or something. And at the end, you tell it that again. And as Jim already mentioned, use LLM to make it better. So once you think you have your best prompt, go again to 4.0 or something and tell, look, I'm doing this use case. This is my system prompt. Is there any way to make it better? What do you think about it? And give me advice and something like that.
Um, Actually, one more thing that came to my mind. So, my dear friend DJ Adams from our team during last year TechEd's developer keynote said that, like, maybe finally we see where English is the programming language of the future, and it means a pain for those of us who are not English native speakers. Then all of a sudden, yes, we do need to start paying attention, to proper pronunciation, because when we make a mistake and we use singular word instead of plural, then all of a sudden the code that is going to be generated is going to be different, right? Uh, and
Yeah,
lucky
I
you,
agree with TJ.
lucky
Good
you
thing his
that
English is impeccable, right? So he'll be fine.
he will be fine, but
His
it means that all of us, we will need to get to the DJ's level
his written
using.
English, he's Irish, right? So yeah,
No,
sometimes it's
no,
hard for
he.
me to understand.
So I saw that you answered questions already in the chat. And we are over the hour. It was a wonderful session, lots of code. You could see it was live because there were some bugs. So it always shows that there is nothing kind of like, pre-recorded, scripted. It's all live. So I hope that everyone enjoyed watching this session, no matter at what speed you are going to watch the recording, if it is going to be 0.5 or 1.2. Just enjoy it. Frank, Jim, once again, huge shout-outs for you for this session and for everyone who joined this session live or watching the recording. You can still post the questions as a comment below this video, or you can post them as at the event page of SAP community. We will make sure that these questions will reach to our presenters and you will get your questions answered. I would like to remind that there will be the validation tutorial posted later today for all 3 sessions that were presented during this day, and you can then prove that you not just kind of like watch this session, but as well you understood what was discussed here. And this way you can get some valuable points in our. You see, I just made a mistake. Instead of points, I said point, and immediately LLM would generate the wrong data model for that. So you are going to get points by answering these questions. So stay tuned for more. Tomorrow is the last day of the Oktoberfest before we are taking 1 week break. And I hope that you are going to join SAP Tech at Virtual. Next week, there are going to be a lot of valuable sessions there as well. There are going to be keynotes, including our developer keynote that is going to be called Developer Keynote Deconstructed this year. And with that, I would like to conclude this session. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, everyone watching. Have a good evening or
Thanks
the
again.
day.
Bye. Thanks, everybody. Vitaly, Jim.
Okay, I clicked the end of the stream.
All right.